Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We are on the Kitab Ashribah, the book of drinks, and the next chapter about the permissibility of drinking the Zamzam water whilst you are standing. The narration of Ibn Abbas, he says, I served the Prophet the Zamzam water and he drank it standing up. Two reasons are given for this. There could be more, but we'll mention two reasons. Firstly, it's because the place was tight and you cannot sit down quite as easily. And also if he's drinking from the bucket, then it's easier to drink standing up. So in other words, there was a need for him to stand up because it was easier to do so. Another reason given by the ulama is that standing up makes you drink more than sitting down. And with the Zamzam water, it is better to drink more than less. And so standing up will encourage you to drink more. In any case, we say that the recommendation is to drink sitting down unless you have a need, in which case you drink standing up. The next chapter about breathing into the drinking vessel and taking 3 breaths whilst drinking. From Abu Qatada, he says that the Prophet forbade breathing into the drinking container. What's the reason for this prohibition then? Well, firstly, it is unhygienic. You could be spreading germs through your breath into the drinking vessel, and especially if somebody else is going to drink after you, it will certainly put him off. And then secondly, you could resemble animals as they drink. They are just drinking consistently without taking a breath or without taking their mouth away from the drinking place. And what is apparent from the hadith is that any drink takes the same ruling. So whether you're drinking water or milk or fruit juice or anything, you do not breathe into the vessel. Rather, what you need to do is to take your mouth away, take a breath, and then put your mouth back and drink. So this narration then resembles the previous narration, which spoke about not drinking directly from the mouth of the water skin, because in doing so, you could put some of your saliva into the water, and anyone who drinks after you then would be put off or feel averse. And you can spread germs this way as well. The next narration of the chapter, from Anas, he says that the Prophet used to breathe 3 times when drinking, and the Prophet would say, إِنَّهُ أَرْوَى وَأَبْرَى وَأَمْرَى. It is more thirst-quenching, it is healthier and more wholesome. So Anas says, I also breathe 3 times in the course of drinking a drink. So this rule about breathing 3 times or taking 3 breaths, is it about every single drink that you drink? The answer is no. This pertains to cold drinks, the type of drinks which you can drink in a big gulp. So the idea is not to drink in a big gulp, but rather, instead of drinking it all in a big gulp, to take 3 breaths. Because if you're drinking a hot drink like tea or hot chocolate or coffee, there is no way you're going to complete a whole cup of tea in just 3 breaths. Rather, you will need many breaths. Sometimes you may just have a bottle of cold water and you just want to take a sip to perhaps just hydrate yourself. Maybe if you are speaking, you need to hydrate your throat. So taking a sip there is fine. It's not about 3 breaths. The 3 breath rule applies to those times when you could drink in one big gulp. It is to split that big gulp up into 3 breaths. And the Prophet tells us that is more thirst quenching and more wholesome. So he calls it arwa, that is more thirst quenching. He calls it abra, which is that it heals the harms of thirst more effectively. And it is amra, that is more wholesome, so that is to say the water thereby would absorb more effectively into the body. If a person is very thirsty and he needs to drink a large amount of water and he needs more than 3 breaths, is this okay? Well, the answer is yes, it's okay. 3 breaths is better, but if you need to take more, there's no problem. The next chapter, if you are passing water or milk around and you are all sitting in a circle, then you start from the right-hand side. Anas bin Malik reports that milk was brought to the Prophet. To his right was sitting a Bedouin, and to his left Abu Bakr. And so the Prophet passed the milk to his right. He gave it to the Bedouin, and the Prophet said, Al-Ayman fal-Ayman, the right and then the right. We simply learn from this narration that you give precedence to the right. The right generally is for all that which is good and positive. So when you wear your clothes, you put your right foot or hand in the clothing first. When you enter the masjid, it's with the right foot first. So the right is given precedence in all that which is good and proper. and wholesome. And passing food and drink is from that. In a circle of people, if you're going to shake hands with all of them, start with the right and go around that way. You're going to go anti-clockwise. We find from the narration that if it comes to virtue, then Abu Bakr certainly deserves the milk after the Prophet has drunk from it. Yet the Prophet gave it to the A'rabi on his right. And this is because you do not show favoritism to anyone when it comes to the haqq, when it comes to the truth. Otherwise, if favoritism could be shown, it would have been shown to Abu Bakr. Also in the chapter, from Sahal ibn Sa'ad, he says that the Prophet was given a drink and he drank from it. There was a boy on his right hand side and some old men to his left hand side. He said to the boy on his right, أَتَأْذَنُ أَنْ أُعْطِيَ هَؤُلَاء? Do you permit me to give this drink to these older men to my left hand side? And the boy said, No, by Allah, I will not prefer anyone over me with what you have to give. And so to that the Prophet gave the drink to the boy on his right. We find from this narration that it is permissible for you to start with the left as long as you seek permission from the one on the right, because he has most right that you should give it to him. But if he gives you permission to begin from the left, then so be it. But if that is the case, one would ask the obvious question, in the previous narration, where the A'rabi was to his right and Abu Bakr was to his left, why did the Prophet not ask the A'rabi permission to give it to Abu Bakr first? And the reason is because normally the A'rabi, the Bedouins, become angry easily and they are prideful. So beginning with Abu Bakr would offend the sensibility of the A'rabi. Even asking him permission would offend his sensibility because they are highly strung people. Whereas the same is not to be said with this boy to the right. It has been said that this boy is Ibn Abbas. The boy did not give permission because he wanted the gift from the Prophet first, because of the love he had for the Prophet. Let's move to the next chapter about licking your fingers 3 times after eating and picking up food from the floor and eating it after blowing the dust off it. The first narration from Ibn Abbas, the Prophet said, إِذَا أَكَلَ أَحَدُكُمْ طَعَامًا فَلَا يَمْسَحْ يَدَهُ حَتَّى يَلْعَقَهَا أَوْ يُلْعِقَهَا. When one of you eats food, then he should not wipe his hand until he licks the hand first or has somebody else lick it. We find in the hadith he says either he licks the fingers or gives it to somebody else to lick. Is the Prophet giving a genuine choice here, or is the narrator in doubt? Did the Prophet say lick it himself, or did the Prophet say gives it to somebody else to lick? These are 2 possibilities. If we say that the narrator is reliable, then we ought to say that the Prophet is giving us a choice here. Because if we say that the narrator is in doubt, then this would be something of a disparaging remark about the narrator. So to avoid that, we would say that the Prophet is giving us a choice. Either you lick your finger or have somebody else lick it. As for somebody who is too proud and says that I'm not going to lick my fingers because I find it to be not fitting, or he finds himself averse to licking his fingers after the food, when we say to such a person that the sunnah is more worthy to be followed than your own worthless sensibilities. As for giving it to somebody else to lick, well, you cannot force them. They may feel averse. However, between something like a husband and a wife, where there is much more familiarity, licking each other's fingers would not be too strange. So if you're going to wipe your hands or wash your hands, then do not do so before you have licked your fingers. But on this matter, note a serious mistake which can be made. If somebody licks the finger of a, let's say, sheikh or somebody who he respects, seeking a blessing, tabarruk, to seek a blessing, this is a grave mistake. Seeking a blessing from the effects of a person, body parts and so on, can only be done from the Prophet, no one else. Also from Jabir, the Prophet said, إِذَا وَقَعَتْ لُقْمَةُ أَحَدِكُمْ فَلْيَأْخُذْهَا فَلْيُمِطْ مَا كَانَ بِهَا مِنْ أَذَى وَلْيَأْكُلْهَا وَلَا يَدَعْهَا لِلشَّيْطَانِ وَلَا يَمْسَحْ يَدَهُ بِالْمِنْدِيلِ حَتَّى يَلْعَقَ أَصَابِعَهُ فَإِنَّهُ لَا يَدْرِي فِي أَيِّ طَعَامِهِ الْبَرَكَةُ. If some morsel or a piece of food drops, then one of you should pick it up and remove any dust or dirt from it and eat it, and do not leave it for the shaitan. And one of you must not wipe his hand with a cloth until he has licked his fingers, because one of you does not know in which part of his food there is blessing. Also from Abdullah ibn Ka'b, from his father Ka'ab, who says that the Prophet used to eat with 3 fingers, and when he had finished, he would lick them. So we find that the sunnah of eating is to eat with 3 fingers, and that is for those types of food in which this is possible or easy. As for those types of food in which it is not easy, then you do not have to eat with 3 fingers, such as, for example, rice. You would not be able to eat rice with 3 fingers, and you'd be sitting there forever trying to eat with 3 fingers. And why 3 fingers? Well, it reduces your greed and avarice, because greedy people, the gluttonous types, they're not going to eat with just 3 fingers. They're going to eat handfuls. Also, we learn about when a piece of food falls down, the sunnah is to pick it up, remove any dust or any other unwanted substance attached to it, and eat it, and do not leave it for the shaitan. And we say a similar thing here. Even if you find this to be repulsive, we say the sunnah is more worthy to be followed. And this sunnah teaches us to safeguard the food and not to waste it. And this action in the sunnah is also a sign of your humility, that you are lowly and not too proud and arrogant to eat food that has fallen on the floor. And it is always a good idea to deprive the shaitan of your food. That is why you also say Bismillah before eating. And deprive the shaitan of your home, which is why you say Bismillah as you enter. And from the hadith we learn that if a drink falls down, then you do not need to pick it up, because this is not a luqma, it is not a morsel of food, something which is solid. And we also learn that if it is not possible to remove the dirt or the filth from the food, then you do not have to eat it, because in eating such a food you'll only be harming your own self. As the Prophet ﷺ says, فَلْيُمِطْ مَا كَانَ بِهِ مِنْ أَذَى, then let him remove any harm from it. But if that is not possible, then the hadith would not apply to it. Also we learn the wisdom of licking your fingers. The Prophet said, فَإِنَّهُ لَا يَدْرِي فِي أَيِّ طَعَامِهِ الْبَرَكَةِ. You do not know in which part of your food there is barakah. So it could be that when you lick your fingers, that part of the food has barakah, and so the effects of that barakah would be that it keeps you satiated and filled. Whereas if you did not lick the finger, and you did not attain therefore the barakah, then you would still feel hungry, because your food perhaps was deprived of barakah. And so this is the effects of barakah, or blessing in your food, is that it keeps you satiated, and it keeps the hunger away for longer. The next chapter, about when you are invited by a guest, and another person follows you to the house, what should you do? From Abu Mas'ud al-Ansari, he says that a person from the Ansar called Abu Shu'aib had a servant who was a butcher. Abu Shu'aib saw signs of hunger on the face of the Prophet. He said to the servant who was a butcher, "Prepare food sufficient for 5 people, because I want to invite the Prophet." So the servant prepared food, and Abu Shu'aib invited 5 people. As the Prophet was coming to his house, another man followed the Prophet. And upon entering the home of Abu Shu'aib, the Prophet said to the host that this man has followed me. If you want, you can allow him to enter, but if you will, he will return back. And Abu Shu'aib said, "O Messenger of Allah, I permit him." So we find that this is a sunnah. The permission of the host needs to be sought. If somebody uninvited comes, so there must be no one gate crashing the party. Sometimes in a walima where there is more than enough food being cooked, you could tell your guest, "Come along, and anyone you want to bring along, bring them along." Because here, in a walima type of situation, there's going to be more than enough food. But in a situation where it is just a private, small gathering in your home, you've only made enough food for 2 or 3 people, then anyone else who comes along with those whom you have invited, then you would have to give them individual permission. Otherwise, the host could face hardship, and we do not want that. Let us take this next chapter, the permissibility of taking along another guest with you to the house of the host, if you trust that the host will be pleased with your companion whom you are taking along with you. The first narration from Abu Hurairah. He says the Prophet left his house one night, and he found Abu Bakr and Umar also outside. He said, "What has brought you outside?" They said, "It is hunger." The Prophet said, "By the one who has my soul in his hand, hunger has also brought me out." So all 3 of them came along to the house of an Ansari. But he was not at home, his wife was. She welcomed them. The Prophet asked, "Where is the Ansari man?" She replied that he's gone to fetch some fresh water for us. When he came and he saw the Prophet and Abu Bakr and Umar, he said, "Praise be to Allah, no one has more honorable guests today than I." He then went out and brought some ripe dates, dry dates and fresh dates, and he told them to eat. He then took a long knife to slaughter a sheep or a goat, and the Prophet said to him, "Beware of killing a milch animal," that is, the animal who is giving milk. So he slaughtered a sheep for them, and after they had eaten of it and the bunch of dates, they drank, and when they had eaten to their fill, the Prophet ﷺ told Umar and Abu Bakr, "Walladhi nafsi biyadih," by the one who has my soul in his hand, لَتُسْأَلُنَّ عَنْ هَذَا النَّعِيمِ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. You will surely be asked about this pleasure on Yawm al-Qiyamah. أَخْرَجَكُم مِّن بُيُوتِكُمْ الْجُوعُ ثُمَّ لَمْ تَرْجِعُوا حَتَّى أَصَابَكُمْ هَذَا النَّعِيمِ. Hunger drove you out of your homes, and you did not return back until you had experienced this pleasure. We firstly learn from the narration how poor the Prophet and many of his Sahaba were. For them to be driven out of their home just to search for food shows us that they were living a difficult life. And just in case somebody thinks this must have been at the beginning of his prophethood career, later on he became richer, the answer is no. It was all throughout his life. Aisha says that since the Prophet came to Al-Madinah, the Prophet never ate to his fill for 3 nights in a row until he died, and his chainmail was given as a pledge because of some barley which he had bought. We find the virtue of the Sahabi who provided the Prophet and his companions food and drink. His name, as An-Nawawi says, is Abu al-Haytham Malik ibn Tayyihan. And we learn of the lesson to honor the guest, which is a well-known teaching in the Sharia. The Prophet tells him not to slaughter the animal which you have kept for milk, because if that is the case, then you will lose your source of milk. We learn of the lesson that we will be asked about the pleasure of this world in terms of the food and drink. Therefore, it is vital for us to thank Allah Jalla wa Ala for it. There are du'as available for after you eat and drink. Before you eat and drink, you must mention the name of Allah Jalla wa Ala. We've discussed that before. Because you will be asked about these matters. Were you grateful or not? This is where the kuffar will lose, because they showed no signs of gratitude whatsoever, despite the fact that they live in developed, rich countries with the finest type of food and drink. All of this coming their way through no effort from their own selves. They did not choose where to be born. It was just their fortune that they were born in a rich country and had access, therefore, to the luxuries that they do have access to. Yet, not a single word of thanks. So it is upon the Muslim to be as different from that as possible, and to be always expressing gratitude to Allah Jalla wa Ala in the form of adhkar and dua. We have another narration from Jabir ibn Abdullah. He says, when the khandaq, or the ditch, was dug, I saw the Prophet feeling very hungry. He says, I came to my wife and said, is there anything with you? Because I saw the Prophet extremely hungry. She brought out a bag of provision which contained some barley. We also had a lamb which I slaughtered. I cut it into pieces, put it in the pot, and returned to the Prophet. She said to him, do not humiliate me in the presence of the Prophet and those who are with him. Meaning to say, do not invite so many people that we cannot afford to feed them all, simply because the food is limited. So Jabir says he came to the Prophet and he secretly told him, we have slaughtered a lamb for you and we have some barley. So you come along just with a group of people. But thereupon the Prophet said, O people of the ditch, Jabir has arranged a feast for you, so come along. The Prophet told him, do not move your earthen pot from the hearth. The hearth is the floor of a fireplace. And he said, do not bake the bread from the kneaded flour until I come. So what happened is that the Prophet has actually invited everybody. Jabir says, I came to my wife and she said to me, you will be humbled. That is to say, we're going to be humiliated. We cannot afford to feed all of these people. I said, I did what you asked me to do. That is only to invite a small number of people. So the Prophet came and put his saliva on the kneaded flour and blessed it. And he also put his saliva in the earthen pot and blessed it. And he said, call another baker who can bake with you and bring out the soup from it, but do not remove it from the hearth. He says the guests were 1,000 in number. Jabir says, I take an oath by Allah that all of them ate to their fill until they left, and our earthen pot was brimming over as before. And so was the case with our flour. There is nothing more humiliating for the host that he does not have enough food to feed everyone, and that there will be people who will leave his home hungry. No host in his right mind would be pleased with this. Yet this is exactly the fear which Jabir and his wife had. How on earth are they going to feed 1,000 hungry men? Just remember, they were digging the ditch. in the Battle of Khandaq. That is not an easy job. It will make you very hungry. Yet we find in this narration an ayah from the ayat of prophethood. Ayah meaning a sign. And these types of narrations, which give an ayah from the ayat of prophethood, have reached a mutawatir level, such that they give us ilm qat'i, certain 100% knowledge, that during the lifetime of the Prophet there were ayat testifying to the veracity of the Prophet's prophethood. This ayah of the prophethood took place through the Prophet's saliva, where he put saliva in the earthen pot which was cooking the meat, and also in the dough which was used to make the bread. And this is what barakah is, much goodness which stays. As Jabir and his wife experienced, their pots, after 1,000 men ate from them, were left just as if they had not been touched. Now we cannot make an analogy between the Prophet and any other righteous person, such that any other righteous person can put his saliva on food and there will be this level of barakah. This is why we say that it is not permissible to take barakah from the effects of any person, that is the body parts of any person, except for the Prophet. Also, we have the recommendation of eating together, because eating together is a source of blessing. Another narration from Anas ibn Malik, who says that Abu Talha, his stepfather, said to Sulaym, Anas's mother, "I felt the feebleness in the voice of the Prophet, and I believe this is due to hunger. Did you have anything?" She brought out some barley loaves. Anas says that he went to find the Prophet. He found him in the masjid in company of some people. The Prophet asked him, "Has Abu Talha sent you?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Is it for a meal?" I said, "Yes." And the Prophet stood up and brought along those people with him as well. Abu Talha said to Sulaym, "Here comes the Prophet, along with people, yet we do not have enough food to feed them." And she says that the Prophet knows better. So they came in, and Sulaym brought forth what she had. She brought the bread, and the Prophet commanded that the bread be broken up into small pieces. Then Sulaym broke a small water skin and put seasoning on it. The Prophet recited something regarding it, what Allah Jalla wa Ala wished him to say. He then said, "Allow 10 people to come in and eat." Then the first 10 came and ate to their fill. They went out. Then the next 10 came and ate to their fill and went out, and so on, until a total of 70 or 80 people had eaten to their fill. So this narration is similar to the last one, in that seemingly you do not have enough food. But if Allah Jalla wa Ala puts blessing in it, then a small amount of food can yet serve many, many people. So the matter is not about the quantity of food, rather the matter revolves around how much barakah there is in this food. We can say the same thing with your money. It's not how much money you have, the quantity. Rather, your richness depends on how much barakah you have in that money of yours. In a narration, Anas says he saw the Prophet lying on his belly in the masjid. This point is interesting because we find in the Sunan of Abu Dawud and others that a Sahabi, Ya'ish ibn Takhfa al-Ghifari, was lying down in the masjid on his belly, and he says, "A man moved me with his foot," and he says, "Inna hadhihi duj'atun yubghiduha Allah." This is a type of lying down which Allah hates. And I turned around and I saw it was the Prophet. The way we may reconcile between this apparent conflict is to say that lying down on your belly, that is lying flat on your belly, is prohibited if there is no particular need to do so. But if there is a particular need, such as perhaps it will help restrain your hunger or keep the pangs of hunger in control, then it is permissible. Of your belly, drink for a third and a third for air. Also, we ask the question, is it okay that the Prophet brought along all of the people of the Khandaq to the house of Jabir? Likewise, he brought along 70 or 80 people to the house of Abu Talha, when clearly these people were not invited. And the answer is, if you know that the host will not mind, then you can bring along other people. So this is all down to how people behave and think in the customs of where you are living. Let's move to the next chapter about eating soup and pumpkin. From Anas ibn Malik, he says that a tailor invited the Prophet to a meal, and I went along with him. The tailor presented to the Prophet some barley bread and soup containing pumpkin and sliced pieces of meat. Anas says, I saw the hand of the Prophet going after the pumpkin round the dish. And he says, I've always liked pumpkin from that day on. We learn from the narration that if somebody invites you over for a meal, then accept the invitation. Otherwise, the host may take offense. He may think that perhaps you think too lowly of him that you're not going to accept his invitation. And this man was a tailor, which was not seen as a very high status job. So even answering the invitation of people who have a lowly job is from the character of the Prophet, and hence it ought to be from our character. Anas says that I liked pumpkin after that day, simply because the Prophet would like it. And there is no problem in imitating the Prophet in these matters, even if they are not acts of ibadah. We learn from the narration that the Prophet would like to eat pumpkin, and we find that his hand went around the plate towards the pumpkin. But we have just learned from the previous narration, where the Prophet told Umar ibn Abi Salama, Kul mimma yalik, eat from the side nearest to you. But here it appears the Prophet is not eating on the side nearest to him, and the answer to that is that the pumpkin was not nearest to the Prophet. So if there is a particular type of food which is not nearest to you, then you can reach out for it. As for if all the food is the same in the plate, then you eat from the side nearest to you. One might ask the question, how is it that you all of a sudden begin to like pumpkin and you did not like it before quite as much, as is the case with Anas? And the answer is, the more you love a person, the more you begin to copy him, just as Anas did with the Prophet. And your taste may also begin to change. Some people may even begin to speak like the one they love. For example, some narrations from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, you would think the Prophet is saying them, but they are in fact the words of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. So even your style of speech can change. Okay, the next chapter about taking the date stones out of the date and making dua for your host. From Abdullah ibn Busr, he says, the Prophet came to my father and we brought him a meal from dates, cheese and butter. He ate from that and he was given dates, but he placed their stones between his fingers and joined his forefinger and middle finger. Then a drink was brought for him and he drank it, and then he gave the drink to the one who was on his right hand side. He says, my father took hold of the rein of his riding animal and requested the Prophet to make dua for us. And to that the Prophet made the dua, Allahumma barik lahum fima razaqtahum waghfir lahum warhamhum. O Allah, bless them in what you have provided them, and forgive them and have mercy on them. We find here that the date stones should not be put with the dates, because the one who is eating would not like that, as the date stones are not eaten. We also learn the same lesson we learned before. When you drink and you're passing it around, you start with the right hand side, and that this is the asl. We learn that it is a good idea to make dua for your host, as he has gone to the trouble of preparing food and drink for you, so it's only right that you should make dua. And this is the legislated dua that we make. Allahumma barik lahum fima razaqtahum waghfir lahum warhamhum. The next chapter about eating cucumber and succulent dates. From Abdullah ibn Ja'far, he says, I saw the Prophet eating cucumber and succulent or fresh dates. The asl on eating cucumber and succulent dates that it is halal anyway. We do not need an evidence to suggest that it is halal, as that is the asl, but an evidence nevertheless does not harm. Cucumber and succulent dates are beneficial food. The next chapter about showing modesty while eating and how one should sit. Anas ibn Malik says, I saw the Prophet squatting and eating dates. The word used in the narration is muq'iyan, from iqa'a. This would be when you put the balls of your feet on the ground, and so your feet are erected up, and your buttocks are on the heels of your foot. So the ball of your feet on the floor, and the buttocks on the heel. And this iqa'a, even if you're allowed to sit like this when eating, as we find here from the narration, but it is not permissible to do so in the salah. Even though we have the narration of Ibn Abbas who says that you are allowed to do it, but it seems as though the Prophet used to do it, but then he would resort to the iftirash and tawarruk methods of sitting. So this is what we will go by. But as for if you're eating, then yes, you can make the iqa'a position. The way we have defined iqa'a is the way the fuqaha have defined it. There are certain other definitions of this as well. For example, the iqa'a of the dog is that your buttocks are on the floor and your thigh and shin are raised or erected, and you put your hand on the floor as well for support. So here you would be resembling the way a dog sits. Just as you see any ordinary dog sitting down. Buttocks are on the floor, the thighs and shin of the dog are erected up, and his hands on the floor as well. The hands meaning the front two limbs. The next chapter about the prohibition of eating two morsels or two dates at the same time. From Jabalah ibn Suhaym, he says that Ibn Zubayr would provide us with dried dates during the time of famine, we would be eating them, and Ibn Umar passed by us and he said, "Do not eat 2 dates together," that is at the same time, because the Prophet forbade that, except if one of you seeks permission from his brother. In this narration, what is prohibited is the qiran. Qiran, which literally means to link or join 2 things together. Why is this? Well, first of all, it shows you to be greedy and avaricious, which is not from the characteristics of the Muslim. And then secondly, you could be transgressing thereby against your brother, because if you take 2 dates, then you could be depriving him of his turn. So if everyone takes 1 date each, turn by turn, then this is a lot fairer, and there is no transgression on the other party. But if you seek permission and permission is given to you, then there is no danger of transgression, and this is fine. Note that this prohibition applies to those food items which are eaten singly, such as dates. As for if you're eating such food items which are not eaten singly, then there is no problem in making qiran with such food item, such as hummus, because normally it is not eaten singly as dates are. Notice these narrations are actually talking about food and not drink, yet we are in the Ashribah. The next chapter, about storing dates and such like for the family. From Aisha, the Prophet said, "La yaju'u ahlu baytin indahum at-tamar." A family which has dry dates will not go hungry. In this narration, there is a virtue, a fadila for dried dates. Dried dates are ideal types of food because of the sugar that they have, so that they will give you the nourishment and energy that you need. Also, they can be stored for a long time and they will not go off, like many other food items, which could go bad after an extended time period. The next chapter about the excellence of the dates of Al-Madinah. From Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, the Prophet said, "Man tasabbaha bis-sab'i tamaratin ajwatan lam yadurrahu dhalika al-yawma summun wala sihr." Whoever in the morning eats 7 ajwa dates, then neither poison nor magic will afflict him that day. The dates mentioned here are the ajwa dates. They are a particular type of date in Al-Madinah. However, the ulama say that this hadith is general. It includes all dates of Medina, be it ajwa or other than ajwa. There is a difference of opinion about this narration. Does this narration apply to the dates of Al-Madinah only, or to dates outside Medina? There is a difference of opinion. Another narration of the chapter talks about the dates between the 2 lava plains of Al-Madinah. So this means any date of Al-Madinah. So the narration is not specific just for the ajwa dates. Take note of that. And we also find that this protection is just for that particular day. It is not a permanent type of protection. And we also say that this is a sabab, a cause. It does not mean that this is a guaranteed protection, because for every sabab you could have a preventative factor. Let's move to the next chapter about the kam'ah, which are truffles. From Sa'id ibn Zayd, he says, the Prophet says, "Al-kam'atu min al-man wa ma'uha shifa'un lil-'ayn." That kam'ah, or truffles, are from man. So this kam'ah is a type of plant which is hidden in the earth. During the rainy season you find it plentiful. This word man here comes from the word minna, which is a favor given to you. And this is because the kam'ah, they grow without any effort on the part of the humans. He says its water is healing for the eyes. It does not have water, but it does have moisture. But if you cook them, then they can be squeezed and water comes out from it. And this liquid is healing for the eye. Allah Jalla wa Ala gave Banu Israel al-man as well, but that is the honeydew from the trees. And truffles, the kam'ah, is something different, but they have one thing in common, which is that they come forth without any human effort. And that's why some narrations say that this kam'ah is from the man which Allah granted Banu Israel. Man of Banu Israel and kam'ah are 2 different things, but they emerge forth without any human effort. So that's why it's from that. That is to say, from those food stuff which come forth without any human effort. The next chapter about the merit of the kabath, which is a fruit from the arak tree. From Jabir ibn Abdullah, he says, "We were with the Prophet at a place called Mar al-Dhahran, and we were plucking out the kabath, which is the fruit from the arak tree. And the Prophet said to them, "Alaykum bil aswad minhu." You should pluck the black fruit out. He says, we said to the Prophet, O Messenger of Allah, as if you have been a shepherd for the sheep. And the Prophet said, Na'am, وَهَلْ مِن نَبِيٍّ إِلَّا وَقَدْ رَعَاهَا. Yes, and has there ever been a prophet before who was not a shepherd? So the Prophet asked this rhetorical question, meaning to say that every prophet has been a shepherd. The Prophet has ordered them to pick the black one because it has become fully ripened. And we also learn that every prophet has had this humble job of being a shepherd for the sheep. And this is good training because later on, this prophet, when he enters his prophet career, would have to be the shepherd of people. And people are sheeple. They have this flock mentality. And the one which separates from the flock can be devoured. And they need to be looked after. And they do not know what is best for them. Next chapter about the vinegar. From Aisha, the Prophet said, نِعْمَ الْأُدُمُ الْخَلْ. What an excellent condiment vinegar is. Khal or vinegar, how did they produce it? Well, they would put dates in water and it will stay like that for a few nights and it will give the water some sweetness. We take from the narration that you can praise certain food items if you like them, and we also take that you're allowed to consume vinegar. Also from the other narrations, we find that the Prophet uttered these words because when he asked them for food, he was told, we only have vinegar. As if to say, we only have vinegar, and vinegar is not particularly a prized item. And so the Prophet wanted to raise the status of vinegar, so he spoke highly of it. And this is a good idea, to speak highly of that food which you have, and to be grateful for the little amount of food which you have. The next chapter about consuming garlic, but avoiding it if you want to speak to somebody of high eminence. Aflah, the freed servant of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, reports that when the Prophet first came to Al-Madinah, he lodged at the house of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari. The Prophet was on the lower floor and Abu Ayyub was on the upper floor. One day Abu Ayyub got up and said, how unfortunate that we are walking above the head of the Prophet. So he felt it was not fitting. So they went away and spent the night on a side place. They told the Prophet about that, and the Prophet said that the lower story is more comfortable for me. But Abu Ayyub insisted, I do not want to live on the roof above you. Abu Ayyub simply did not deem it to be fitting. And so the Prophet moved up to the upper story, and Abu Ayyub to the lower story. And Abu Ayyub would make food to the Prophet and send it to him. The Prophet would eat and send the rest of the food back to Abu Ayyub, and Abu Ayyub would ask his servant, which part of the food did the Prophet touch? And he would follow his fingers on the part of the food which the Prophet touched, seeking blessing thereby. One day he made food which contained garlic, and the Prophet simply returned the garlic back to him, and Abu Ayyub was told that he did not eat from this garlic. And Abu Ayyub became upset and went up to ask the Prophet, why is it haram? And went up to ask the Prophet, is it haram? The Prophet said, no, but I dislike it. And to that Abu Ayyub said, I dislike what you dislike. And Abu Ayyub would say that the Prophet would use to receive revelation. We find from this narration the incredible honor given to Abu Ayyub al-Ansari out of all the other companions, in that the Prophet lodged at his house when he first arrived in Al-Madinah. What an honor that would have been. We also find the incredible respect that Abu Ayyub had for the Prophet. He felt uncomfortable living above the Prophet. He did not find it fitting. Clearly the Prophet was no ordinary man in his eyes. We find the Prophet saying that the lower story is more comfortable for him, and this should be the way the Muslim acts, is that he chooses that which is most comfortable and convenient for him, as long as it is not haram. We find the good character of the Prophet in that he acceded to the request of Abu Ayyub just to put him at ease as the Prophet moved to the upper story. We find from the narration that Abu Ayyub is following that part of the food which the Prophet touched. He's seeking blessing. Like we said before, this is specific to the Prophet, not to any other virtuous person. We find it is permissible to eat garlic, as the Prophet explicitly states here. When he was asked, "Aharamun hu?" Is it haram? The Prophet replied, "La walakinni akrahu." No, but I dislike it. And this would be similar to the narration of the sand lizard, the dub. It is not haram, but the Prophet disliked it as it was not from the food which he is used to, that is the food of his land. And garlic likewise, the Prophet disliked to eat it, but it was not haram. Abu Ayyub said that I also dislike it, and this would be similar to Anas getting to like pumpkin when he found out that the Prophet likes pumpkin. as he saw the Prophet's hand moving around the plate, seeking out the pumpkin. If a person eats garlic, or onions for that matter, and it happens to be the time of the Salat al-Jama'ah, we would tell him not to go to the masjid because of the offensive smell that onions and garlic have, and we can add leek to that list as well, qurrath in Arabic. If a person purposefully eats garlic in order not to go to the masjid, then this is haram on his part. Yes, it's true he would not go to the masjid, but this would not be a benefit to him, rather this would be a harm on him, because we know that the malaika are harmed by what harms or annoys the Banu Adam. However, there is a way around this. If you cook the garlic or the onions such that its smell disappears, then you can eat garlic and onions and still go to the masjid. Because if it is cooked, then the smell disappears, and hence the illah, or the justification for keeping away from the masjid, no longer is present, and hence the ruling is no longer present. And Umar radiallahu anh said, whoever wants to eat the garlic or onions, then let him cook it first, so as to kill the smell off. What about if somebody just swallows garlic straight off without chewing it, so as not to give the smell a chance to emanate, because it emanates as you chew it? Well, if somebody swallows it, then it does not appear to us that any smell will emanate from his mouth. And if that is the case, then again, he can go to the masjid. The next chapter, about showing honor to the guest and preferring the guest over your own self. Abu Hurairah reports that a person came to the Prophet and said that I am hungry. The Prophet sent a message to one of his wives for food, and she replied, by the one who has sent you with the truth, there is nothing with me except water. Another one of his wives gave the same reply, until all of them gave the same reply. They all only had water. Then the Prophet said to his companions that Allah will show mercy to him who will entertain this guest tonight. A person from the Ansar stood up and said that I am ready to entertain the guest tonight. He took him to his house and asked his wife, do we have any food for our guest? She said, no, we only have the subsistence for the children. He said to his wife, okay, distract the children's attention, and when the guest enters, extinguish the lamp so that he will not be able to see us, so that he thinks that we are eating as well. So they did so, and the guest ate to his full. The next morning, the Prophet said to this man, قَدْ عَجِبَ اللَّهُ مِنْ سَنِيعِكُمَا بِضَيْفِكُمَا اللَّيْلَةِ. Allah Jalla wa Ala was pleased with what you did with your guest last night. We take from this inspirational and moving narration that firstly, the Prophet's family did not have much food. All of his wives only had water. Try to imagine your life like that. Only water in the fridge, that's it. Then imagine how much sabr this would take. We find the virtue of this Ansari. We have different narrations as to what his name was, but the point is, whoever he was, there is a great virtue in this narration for him, in how he preferred his guest over his own self, even his own children, and that Allah Jalla wa Ala was well pleased with their actions. We find the permissibility of at-tawriyah, which is when you act in such a way so as to make one person believe you're doing something, whereas you have the intention of something else. As they turn the light off, giving the guest the impression that they are eating, because the guest could not see them very well, yet in actual fact they were not eating, they were going hungry. The Prophet would do something similar during war times. He would make off as if he's heading towards the south, whereas actually he intends to head towards the north, so that nobody can predict his movements, because during war times you need to have the element of surprise. Tawriyah is permissible, but only in a case of pressing need. You should not do it all the time, because you're flirting with lying in that case, and you do not want to be a liar. A man came and asked Al-Imam Ahmad for one of his students, Al-Muruzi. Al-Imam Ahmad did not want his student to go out and meet the visitor, because it would interrupt the lesson. And Al-Imam Ahmad said, Al-Muruzi is not here. And Al-Imam Ahmad was pointing to the palm of his hand. That is to say, Al-Muruzi is not on the palm of my hand. So the visitor went away, despite the fact that Al-Muruzi was in the circle of Al-Imam Ahmad. For you to do tawriyah in order to commit a dhulm, such as take somebody's wealth without due right, this is haram. If you are being oppressed, then for you to make tawriyah in order to take what is rightfully yours is permissible. So for example, if somebody asks you, where is Fulan? And they're asking because they want to oppress him, and you want to prevent that, so you say, I do not know about him. And so this is very broad. You do not know about him with regards to what? Whether he's sleeping or awake? whether he's in the house or not. You could interpret it in many ways. So this is also tawriyah. And we could even argue that it is obligatory upon you to do this. Ibrahim a.s. also made tawriyah when he says about Sarah that she is my sister. She was his wife, of course, but sister in the deen. And this is so that the king does not kill Ibrahim and take his wife. As for if you're not a zalim nor mazloom, so you're neither here nor there, what about this situation? Some scholars said it is permissible, others said it is not permissible. We say that if you do not have any pressing need to do so, then you must not make tawriyah, because you will become known as a liar. Even if your intention was not to lie, but people do not know about your intention, they do not know your heart, they only know what appears thereof, that is to say, outwardly. And if what appears outwardly to them is different to what you are uttering, they will deem you to be a liar. We also find from the narration the word ajab used. Now the word ajab can have two meanings. Firstly, it is when you're pleased with something, and secondly, it is when you are surprised, when something unexpected happens. Now Allah Jalla wa Ala is never shocked or surprised in the same way we are, because we are shocked or surprised because of our lack of knowledge. But that cannot apply to Allah. But rather, the ajab for Allah Jalla wa Ala would be that somebody does something which is not normally done by a person of his standing or class or ability. Because here is this Sahabi who gave precedence to this guest whom maybe he's never met before over his own wife and children. Now which average person would do that? No one. But Allah Jalla wa Ala knew from before that he was going to do this. However, the ta'ajjub for Allah Jalla wa Ala is that this does not normally happen. But at the same time, Allah knew what he was going to do. So the ta'ajjub for Allah is not the same as our ta'ajjub. Our ta'ajjub is because of our lack of knowledge and understanding. However, we may ask a question here. Is it permissible to give precedence to your guest over your children? Well, normally your children take precedence. However, it may be that in this particular case, the guest was more hard-pressed for food than the children. It may be the case that the children could survive for a little longer, whereas the guest was more desperate. And this Ansari knew that he'll be able to earn and bring food in for the children so that the children will not suffer. If that is the case, then there is no problem in what the Ansari did. If it be the case that your children are going to die if you do not give them right away, then you must give your children precedence. Let's take some review questions at this stage. So question number 1. What's the ruling on standing up whilst eating and drinking? Question number 2. Recall 2 incidents where the Prophet performed food miracles. We mentioned one incident of Jabir and the other one of Abu Talha. Recall the incidents. Question number 3. What is the dua the guest should make for the host, as reported in the hadith of Abdullah ibn Busr?